Hey guys, it's Megan here. So this is one of my last few videos before I have this baby. So I wanted to make sure to do a January wrap up though, because I did actually read some books this month and I'm pretty excited about it. So let's get started. Oh, and of course, as always, I forgot to mention I'm a high school librarian and we're back in the library today. Although I might be filming from home starting soon when I have the baby. Okay, so the first book that I started, I actually did not finish. My very first read of the year. I'm kind of sad. I hope that doesn't indicate how this year is going to go for me, but I did not finish this book. I read about 35% of it. It's called The Field Guide to the North American Teenager by Ben Philippi. This is a YA contemporary kind of novel about a kid who originally is from Canada. He moves to Austin, Texas, and he is also African American, and so he just doesn't feel like he, as a Black Canadian, fits in with the culture of Austin, Texas. But it's kind of about just his fitting in, and I just thought that the premise was really cool because it has like a term and then a definition for that term, like you would maybe see in like a field guide, like hallway encounters, and then it tells like what happens in a hallway encounter as if it were in a field guide, and it does this for every chapter. So I thought it was a really cool premise. That's why I chose to read this one. It was from one of the books that I got for the library. I talked about it in another video and I was so intrigued that I started reading it just for something fun, something different than like an epic fantasy, but I couldn't really get into it. Honestly, it was just the same to me as all other YA books about kids with their problems. And if you like that kind of thing, you would probably like this because the writing style was actually pretty funny. It was pretty clever. This guy, I believe this was his debut book. Yes, it was. And he also writes he's a screenwriter, things like that as well. He has a very similar life story where he is from Montreal, and he also lived in Austin, Texas, and he is also African American. So I feel like, this is definitely based on his own experiences, but it just really wasn't the book for me. All right, the next book I read is Ruin and Rising. So this was the third book in the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. I had read the first two in December, and then finally I got around to reading the third one. So I did all of this in preparation to read Six of Crows, which we'll talk about in a minute. Because I'd heard that if you read the Grisha trilogy first, that the Six of Crows duology makes a lot more sense because it is set in the same universe, and you should just read this one first. So I did, and I did not like any of these. I gave them all 2 stars, and this one, still 2 stars. This did not improve. I can't really tell you much about this one, of course, without spoiling the other ones. Go watch my other, my December wrap up and you can see what the other ones were about. But let's just suffice it to say that the Grisha trilogy, even though I hear it talked about, I guess people either love it or hate it, it's not for me. It's just very simple YA nonsense, really, honestly. I hate to insult people by saying that, but that's how I felt about it. I mean, I just didn't think that this got any better. I didn't care about the ending. I mean, the world that they live in is the only part that is sort of interesting, which is why I was super excited to read Six of Crows, because at least I knew that it was set in this like Russian-inspired world, and there's like magic and just really cool different, like it tells you in the beginning, of course there's a map, there's like a different world, that kind of thing. But in the beginning, it tells you who the Grisha are, like the Corporalkai, the Etherealkai, and the Materialkai, and what they can do. So this is actually interesting. If it had more of this and less of just the boring plot, chosen one kind of trope that this book is, then I'd probably be more interested in it. I don't care about the romance in it. I didn't care about the plot. Like, I just didn't care about anything. So I gave this book 2 stars, but hey, at least I finished it. Okay, so let's talk about the big build up here, right? Everything I've been reading in this universe, the whole Grisha trilogy, all 3 books, has led to this moment where I finally got to read Six of Crows. I say read, I did not actually read this book. I got 60% and I DNF'd it. I was so sad because I forced myself to get through the other 3, right? The Grisha trilogy, so that I could read this duology that everyone talks about, how it's so much better. And it is, I will say it is totally different than the Grisha trilogy. So it is not just a little like romance novel with hardly anything happening and just like one little plot. This is I don't even know how to describe this. It is a heist story. It says it's about a heist story with 6 dangerous outcasts. So here's what happened. I got about halfway through when I realized that right now there have been no heisting. And that the heist kind of comes at the end from the sounds of it. I didn't make it there, but that's what I hear happens. So what I did is as I was reading it, I realized we were just learning all about these characters. And somebody had told me that this is very character driven. I love character driven stories. However, I realized I only like character driven stories if I like the characters. I didn't care about these people. I didn't care one thing about any of them except Kaz. He was the coolest one. And then when at one point, maybe about, I don't know, 40% of the way through the book or something, he does something kind of like crazy, extremely violent. And I was like, whoa, I didn't expect that like in a young adult book. And now I kind of actually like Kaz, and he's actually pretty cool. So I did like him, but we just had so many other characters that I didn't care about any of the rest of them. The two girl characters, Nina and Inej or whatever, did not care. This like love story with, what's his name? Matthias or whatever. I've even forgotten these people's names. I just stopped reading it like a week ago, but I didn't care about them. They honestly weren't very likable people. And so being all backstory, there's a lot of flashbacks, and it was honestly kind of confusing at points because I was listening to the audiobook and I didn't realize it was a flashback, and I was like, wait a minute, if I was zone out for a second, I wouldn't know if I was listening to a flashback or if I was actually reading the story itself, which is my fault, but that is what happened. So I stopped at 60%, probably just when it was starting to get to the actual heist that they're going to be doing, but I just did not care. So read 60%. I forced myself to read the Grisha trilogy just for this, but I realized it was not worth it. So let's talk about two more books I actually read and finished and relatively enjoyed. And the first one is Seven Deadly Shadows by Courtney Alameda and Valin E. Matani. I say it wrong every time. I did a dedicated rapid review video for this, so it's only 5 minutes long. Go check that out if you want to know my in-depth thoughts. I say in-depth, my 5-minute long thoughts about this book. But it is a Japanese kind of inspired fantasy novel that is set in our world, but has a lot of like Japanese kind of like culture, mythology stuff going on. And I really, really enjoyed this book. It was really fast paced. It's a standalone young adult novel. I've never heard anybody on BookTube talk about it, and I don't really know why, because it's actually really good. I tried reading Forest of Souls by Lori Lee, and this one was like infinitely better. So if you want a Japanese mythology kind of inspired fantasy fast-paced thing with not much romance, then this is the one for you. This was actually really good. Okay, so next I read Kings of the Wild by, I think it's Nicholas Eames. Oh my gosh, I already forgot. I think that's the author's name. That guy wrote something. I think he wrote this. Anyway, so Kings of the Wild. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I gave Seven Deadly Shadows 4 stars, by the way. I forgot about that. This book I gave 3.5 stars. Not that it was like not as good as the other book. It's just that I think I had really high expectations for Kings of the Wild because it is so hyped up on BookTube. People seem to love this. It's like a Viking sort of esque story set in a fantasy world. But the catch is, it's like these people are in a rock band, basically. They're even called a band. They have a frontman of their band. They tour around like a band, except their touring involves slaying monsters and saving princesses and things like that. But this story is about this old group of band members who they were in this band called Saga many years ago. They were super, super famous, but they've disbanded ever since. Now they've gone their separate ways. Different things have happened to them. The main character, Clay, he's not the front man of the band. In fact, if anything, I think he'd almost be sort of like the bassist or something if I had to pick like who he would be in a band. I don't know why, but he has a kid and a wife, and that's really all he cares about nowadays. But the band has to get back together. It kind of reminds me of like the movie Red with Bruce Willis and John Malkovich, if you've ever seen that, where it's like the old crew has to get back together for one last mission, but they're all old now. So that's kind of what this is. They really spend about half the book, honestly, trying to get the band back together or more. So just expect that. There's not too much actual like plot except for let's go find each character and see what they're up to and get them back together. Then towards the end of the book, okay, now we'll actually go do the thing we're supposed to do. Which the thing that they're doing is that the front man of the band, Gabriel, his daughter has been sort of like lost for a while. She's gone, and she kind of went off to go do her own thing, and now she's sort of trapped in this place with this giant like horde of enemies, and he's trying to save her. Some people say it's a lost cause, that she's already dead, and he has to try to convince everybody to come back on board. They run into some interesting characters along the way, And I am going to be doing a dedicated review for this, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but my one problem with it was that it is so like, it is written so much like it's just like the most casual writing style ever. So it takes you out of the world. Like, it doesn't seem like a Viking fantasy world when they're using modern day expressions. And at one point they say something like, the cake is a lie. And I was like, the cake is a lie? That's from like a modern day video game. Like, what? So it is, and the references to them being a rock band are so much that it really does take you out of the story almost. So it was a little too much for me. I didn't think the writing was really that great either, but it was super easy to read because of that. So I just flew through it. It's like 511 pages and I just, flew right through it. But I do recommend it because it was fun and interesting, and I do hope to read the sequel in February. I think it's not really a true sequel. It's just kind of like set in the same world sort of thing, but I do plan on reading it. And the last book I just want to briefly talk about is Metcalfe the Devil by Anne Rice. I started it. I'm 50 pages in. So this is the book I'm currently reading, and I will continue to read into February. I had mentioned wanting to reread some of the Vampire Chronicles, but especially this one. My old copy. Especially this one, though, because I didn't used to like this book. I hated this book. It was my least favorite of all the Vampire Chronicles, except for maybe the Vampire Armand. But after doing my tier ranking video, I convinced myself that maybe I wouldn't hate this book as much. And so I'm giving it another shot just to kind of see what I think. And so far, so good, like for the first 50 pages. I think maybe all the parts with Metcalfe telling his story about being like in heaven and all this stuff, I'm pretty sure all that is actually much later in the book than I remembered. I thought it was like the whole book, but I think it's maybe just like a very small part. So maybe I'm just misremembering, but I can't wait to continue reading this. So those are all the books I read and DNF'd, sadly, in February, or in January. I feel like that's actually pretty good for me because I don't usually have much time to read. So the fact that I got through that many is pretty exciting for me. So February with the baby, who knows? We'll see what February brings. Either I'll have tons of time to read while I'm just sitting at home for 6 weeks and not going to work, or I will have zero time to read. We'll find out. Let's see. All right, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.